So welcome back to my video showing how we make a lap blanket from half a jelly roll. That's 25 strips. This is part 2. If you haven't already seen part 1, go back and view that one. It's about 15 minutes and it'll make sense of what we're doing here. So far I've just got the patchwork created, and if you remember I had created some offcuts which I cut into 5-inch charm squares. As you know, I haven't got that much room in my flat, and I found quite a good solution for this, as long as I don't trip over it. This is making good use of my clothes maiden. And if you remember, when I went to Lady Hayes, I bought bolts of fabric in the antique store, and I bought this white antique linen. And what I've done, I've cut it into long strips and ironed it. At the moment, these are the full length that I can get out, and it's about 7 inches width. I'm going to trim that up and cut it into 6-inch strips, and then I need to measure very carefully to see how I'm going to develop the pattern for my quilt idea. So these were some of the happy accidents I had when I was cutting out my jelly roll length, because if you remember I hadn't measured it before I started sewing it. But I've taken pieces that are solids and I'm going to mark these. If you see my patchwork piece, what I've done, I've taken horizontal and vertical. That's horizontal, that's vertical, and I'm going to do 4 corners, and I've devised a little bit of a pattern, and I'll show you what I mark out on a piece of paper. My patterns are very much in my head, but I need to give you some idea of what I'm planning to do. And the other thing that's arrived today is the Rose and Hubble fabric. This is the same fabric, isn't it beautiful, that's in this pattern. And I'm going to make the binding out of this. I'm going to cut this into 2.5 strips and then sew them together for a length. But this then is my basic pattern. This is my existing, this 29 times 48 is my existing piece of patchwork that I've just showed you. To the 4 corners, 1, 2, oh, I can't do this while I'm doing it on the phone, it's really strange. 2, 3, 4 then are going to be corner pieces. And so that I don't get myself tied in knots again, I'm going to use the trick of marking them A, B, C and D, just with a post-it note. And remember that the orientation that they go in, by the time I get these to the sewing machine, I might have twisted the orientation somewhat, and I want to make sure that they're upright. I'm going to cut, so this is, I'm going to have it that's vertically, horizontally, vertically again and horizontally. And you'll notice that I've cut those out of pieces that have got no plain fabric in them, because my border is going to be plain and I wanted them to stand out. Now 3 then is going to be my border made from the white cotton linen. And I'm actually going to cut it longer and wider than I need. I'm going to cut it with my ruler 6 inches wide. And I'm going to cut it longer than I need. I'm going to cut 2 pieces of each, 2 times 32 inches, which will allow for seams and overhang, and 2 times 50 inches for this length. That'll give me 2 inches extra. And that way I've got a little bit of wiggle room. Now I'm not perfect on my cutting and my measurements, and I'm making this pattern up as I go along. So because I've got plenty of the white linen, I would rather cut more and then have to cut some off than cut it and make it too short. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to use this this matching fabric to do the binding. I don't yet know how much I'm going to need, but I'm going to cut it at 2.5 inches, which is going to be the equal width that the jelly roll strips were in the beginning. By the time I do a seam on there, about I'm going to have about 1 inch showing front and back with it tucked under. and I like that idea. So this 4, once I've got 2 and 3 in place, I'll then measure it again to see how much I need to cut for 4. There's no way I'm cutting into that fabric and ruining it until I know exactly how much length I need. Okay, the other thing I've got today is it's a nice warm day, so I've got some dandelion and burdock to drink, and I've got some really nice music. I'm not finding it easy to hold this in place while I cut with this, and I'm finding this a bit blunt. I have got another one on order, but if you haven't got this piece of equipment, just use a ruler. What I'm doing now is I'm using one of these erasable ink pens, and I'm just using the ruler edge to get a straight edge before I cut my 6 inches across. And then I'm going to cut it with scissors. And I feel I'm going to get more accurate there. It's not going to hurt my muscles as much either. So if you haven't got these tools, use a ruler, a pen, and a pair of scissors. And you can't go wrong with those. I'm attaching my corner pieces to the pieces that are going across the width. So I'm attaching A, B, oops, B, C and D. I haven't got this laid flat. A, B, C and D, but you get the idea. And what I need to do is put right sides together. Make sure I have this bottom line, because this is the edge that's going to be sewn onto the quilt. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam here. Now I'm going to do A and C first, and then I can make sure that I've got the points matching at this point and know exactly how much material to cut across the top to get the points correct at the next end. So I'm going to do that first. And now with the edge of this border, I'm going to match it to the corner, the top left corner that I marked on the quilt. And I've allowed the border to go directly up to the edge of the patchwork piece, allowing for a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I've pinned it in place further down so that it doesn't move. When this flips back, it will give a good 1/4 inch seam allowance. You remember I cut my borders wider than I'm going to need, so I've pinned it right the way across, and I've marked it on the fabric. I've pinned it and marked it on the fabric exactly where I'm going to need to cut it to get an exact match in this top corner. I'm going to cut across here, and then I'm going to sew this B part on exactly as I did part A. We now have a complete width of the corner piece A, the top border across, and the B corner piece. As you see, one is horizontal and one is vertical. This is horizontal B2. I've pinned it, so I'm going to sew right sides together right the way across the top. I'm going to do what I've just done, adding the top piece A and B. I'm going to repeat that on C and D before I do this line of stitching across the top and across the bottom. Right, so I now want to attach my side borders. And what I've done, I'm going to turn this right sides together. As you can see, I've started at A1 and I've got the top piece. And what I've done is I've pinned underneath, and I'm going to sew just this section. And what I've done is allowed a seam allowance on the border. And I've given myself quite a generous seam allowance, just in case that seam isn't straight. Remember, I cut more than I need of this border. So if I've got any wonky seams, the white will take that into account. And I'm going to do that over the top of A and B. And then I'm going to repeat it at C and D, just to attach the fabric at top and bottom. So when I got down to D4, trying to twist and pivot and get the edges to meet is quite difficult, and I'm just not convinced I have. What I am going to do is just going to catch that with a little batch stitch by hand. back stitch by hand. So now I've put the borders on. Certainly it was more difficult adding in the squares, but it certainly adds interest. It's now too big to photograph, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it pinned up here, certainly for a few hours. I've put the fabric I've got for the border just in place, just to give an idea of what it's going to look like with that border in. And now my decision is going to be, what do I quilt it with, and how do I quilt it? And I think I might just keep it simple and stitch in the ditch. I'm going to have a think about it, have something to eat, and just consider. But it certainly was more difficult adding those corner pieces in, but I think overall it adds more interest to the effect, don't you? Well, I've spent a day or two thinking, and because I wanted this to be a summer quilt, I didn't want to put wadding in it. And I'm aware that the wadding that comes, the cotton wadding, there is some shrinkage in it. So what I've decided to do is to use 2 pieces of the linen, one as batting and one as backing. So the middle sandwich layer then is then a linen sheet, a cotton sheet. This will make this truly a 100% cotton. I have got some polyester wadding on order, and that I didn't feel like this merited this. So I've laid it out on the bed and pinned it all in place. I've kept the 2 layers of linen together because that might be easier to sew, and I'm now going to stitch in the ditch. I'm going to quilt the layers together. The other thing I'm going to do is change my needle to a jeans needle. So I've changed my needle to a jeans needle because I'm going to go through thicker layers of fabric here, and I want something that's tough. And you can see that I haven't got a table or a stool to lay anything on, so I've used my computer chair. It will just take the weight of the piece I'm not working with. I can fold under on this side, but I need this to lay as flat as possible. So I'm going to stitch in the ditch. That just means I'm going to stitch along each seam line, and I'm going to start in the middle. Don't worry about speed at this point. Accuracy is more important, and try and keep your work as flat as you can.